The air in the airport terminal was stale, a recycled mix of jet fuel, floor cleaner, and the faint, anxious sweat of 1,000 strangers. Dr. Lena Washington felt it cling to her skin, another layer on top of the exhaustion that had settled deep in her bones. It was a weariness that sleep could not touch, a soul-deep fatigue born from months of watching the strongest woman she had ever known slowly fade away. Her mother. The word itself was a hollow ache in her chest. Lena clutched the thin strap of her carry-on bag, the worn fabric a familiar weight against her shoulder. Inside, tucked between a medical journal and a change of clothes, was the program for the National Cardiology Symposium. Her name was printed in bold letters on the second page. Keynote address, Dr. Lena Washington, MD, PhD, Innovations in Non-Invasive Cardiac Surgery. It felt like a description of a different person, a woman who had energy, who had focus, who wasn't walking through the world as if it were underwater. She had almost canceled. The thought of standing on a stage, of speaking with authority and passion about the human heart, felt like a betrayal when her own was so shattered. But her mother's voice, a gentle but firm echo in her memory, had pushed her to the gate. You don't hide your light, Lena girl. You shine it for everyone who can't. So here she was, honoring a promise, moving on autopilot through the river of travelers. Her clothes were simple, functional, a pair of comfortable gray slacks, a soft cotton blouse, and worn-in flats that had seen the floors of more hospital corridors than she could count. She hadn't had the time or the inclination for shopping. Every spare moment, every ounce of her energy for the past year had been dedicated to her mother's care. Her bank account reflected it, drained by co-pays, experimental treatments, and the cost of being present. She wasn't destitute, but the financial cushion she had carefully built over years of grueling work was gone, sacrificed at the altar of a few more precious months. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass of a closed kiosk. The woman staring back was a ghost. Dark circles pooled beneath her eyes, a testament to sleepless nights spent listening for a labored breath. Her face was thinner, the cheerful roundness of her cheeks replaced by a starker geometry. She was a doctor, one of the best in her field. But in the end, she had been just a daughter, powerless against the inevitable. The grief was a physical presence, a heavy cloak she couldn't take off. As the boarding call for her flight to Chicago echoed through the terminal, she saw an elderly woman struggling to lift a small suitcase into the overhead bin. The woman's hands trembled with age, her face etched with frustration. A stream of impatient passengers simply pushed past her, their focus narrowed to their own seats, their own destinations. Lena didn't hesitate. It was an instinct as natural as breathing. She moved toward the woman, her own fatigue momentarily forgotten. "Here, let me help you with that," she said, her voice soft but clear. She easily lifted the bag and settled it into the compartment, her movements efficient and strong. The woman's face flooded with relief. "Oh, thank you, dear. Thank you so much. People just don't seem to see each other anymore." Lena gave her a small, tired smile. It costs nothing to be kind. It was another of her mother's sayings, a core principle woven into the fabric of her being. Kindness costs nothing, but its value is infinite. She repeated the words to herself, a mantra to keep her moving forward. She found her seat in coach 24B, a middle seat squeezed between a businessman already typing furiously on his laptop and a young woman with headphones blasting tinny music. Lena sank into the cramped space, the familiar discomfort a minor annoyance compared to the turmoil within. She closed her eyes, willing the plane to take off, to carry her away from the city that held so many ghosts. The flight was uneventful for the first hour. The drone of the engines was a hypnotic hum, and despite her discomfort, Lena felt herself drifting on the edge of a much-needed sleep. The beverage service came and went. The businessman beside her ordered a whiskey, the young woman a soda. Lena just asked for water, the cool plastic cup a small comfort in her hands. She was just about to finally succumb to oblivion when a sudden commotion from the front of the plane jolted her awake. It started as a choked cough, a wet, desperate sound that cut through the cabin's monotonous drone. Then came a gasp, sharp and panicked. A flight attendant rushed forward. Voices rose in alarm. Lena's eyes snapped open, every medical instinct she possessed firing at once. She could recognize the sound of a blocked airway from a mile away. It was a sound that meant time was measured in seconds, not minutes. A flight attendant, her voice tight with forced calm, spoke into the intercom. "Is there a doctor on board? We have a medical emergency in first class. If there is a doctor on this flight, please press your call button." Lena's hand shot up, pressing the button above her head without a second thought. The light pinged on. This was what she did. This was who she was. She unbuckled her seatbelt, ready to move. The businessman next to her glanced up from his laptop, annoyed by the disruption. He saw Lena starting to stand and gave a dismissive sneer. "Sit down, honey," he muttered, loud enough for her to hear. "They need a real doctor, not someone looking for attention." His words were a small, sharp sting, but Lena ignored them. She was already moving into the aisle, her focus entirely on the front of the cabin. She could see a man slumped in his seat, his face a terrifying shade of dusky blue. His hands were clawing at his throat. He was choking. He was dying. A lead flight attendant, a woman with a severe blonde haircut and a name tag that read Carol, intercepted her as she tried to move forward. Carol's posture was rigid, her eyes cold and assessing. She took in Lena's simple clothes, her exhausted face, her lack of designer luggage or expensive jewelry. Her gaze was a full-body dismissal. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Carol's tone was clipped, impatient. "I'm a doctor," Lena said, her voice steady and calm despite the adrenaline surging through her. "I heard the call. I need to get to that man." Carol physically blocked her path, planting her feet firmly in the narrow aisle. She folded her arms across her chest, a human barricade. "We need a doctor, ma'am. Please return to your seat. We have the situation under control." The condescension in her voice was thick enough to taste. She hadn't just heard Lena. She had chosen to disbelieve her. Lena felt a familiar, weary frustration rise within her. It was a look she had seen before, in boardrooms, in consultations, in moments where her expertise was questioned, not because of her skill, but because of what she looked like. "I am a doctor," Lena repeated, her voice firmer this time. She tried to peer around Carol at the choking passenger. His movements were getting weaker. They were running out of time. "My name is Dr. Lena Washington. I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon. Now please let me through." The costly decision was made. She could have sat down, allowed the flight attendant's prejudice to win, and let the crew handle it. But that wasn't an option. A life was on the line. She would not let this woman's bigotry be the reason someone died. She held Carol's gaze, her own eyes unwavering. The quiet exhaustion was gone, replaced by the fierce, focused intensity of a surgeon in crisis. She would save this man, whether this flight attendant liked it or not. Carol's lips thinned into a hard, unforgiving line. The title, cardiothoracic surgeon, seemed to bounce off her without making any impression. Her eyes did another slow, insulting sweep of Lena's appearance. From the worn flats to the simple blouse, her expression screamed that this woman, this tired-looking black woman from Coach, could not possibly be what she claimed. To Carol, authority and expertise had a certain look, and Lena Washington did not have it. "A surgeon?" Carol said, her voice dripping with skepticism. The word was an accusation. "That's a very impressive claim. Do you have any proof? A medical license? A hospital ID? Anything at all to back that up?" Her voice was deliberately loud, carrying through the now silent first-class cabin. Every eye was on them. Passengers craned their necks, their phones held up, recording the confrontation. The dying man was now just a part of the scenery, the backdrop for this escalating drama. "My credentials are in my bag in the overhead compartment," Lena said, trying to keep her own voice level, professional. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. "But there isn't time for that. That man has a complete airway obstruction. He has seconds left. We need to perform the Heimlich maneuver, and if that doesn't work, I may need to improvise a cricothyrotomy." The technical terms only seemed to harden Carol's suspicion. She saw it not as evidence of knowledge, but as a bluff. "I'm not going to allow an unknown, unverified person to perform some improvised procedure on a passenger," she declared, her voice rising in pitch. "It's a massive liability for this airline. You could kill him." The irony of the statement was staggering. Carol's inaction, her refusal to accept help, was the very thing that was killing him. Lena could see the man's eyes beginning to glaze over. The frantic clawing at his throat had stopped. He was going limp. "You are the one killing him." Lena's professional calm finally cracked. Her voice was sharp, a command. "Get out of my way. Now." She tried to push past, but Carol stood her ground, her body rigid. "Security!" Carol shrieked, looking toward the other flight attendants. "This woman is becoming hysterical. She is interfering with a medical situation." The humiliation was a physical blow. In front of a cabin full of strangers, she was being painted as a fraud, a hysteric, an obstacle. The businessman from her row was smirking, vindicated. Other faces showed a mixture of confusion, fear, and a kind of morbid entertainment. No one spoke up for her. No one intervened. She was utterly alone, her expertise rendered useless by one woman's prejudice. "Ma'am, I am asking you one last time to return to your seat," Carol said, her face a mask of smug authority. "If you do not comply, you will be restrained and met by law enforcement upon landing." Lena stared at her, a cold fury mixing with a desperate sense of helplessness. She could see the headline now. "Doctor restrained on flight while passenger dies." Her career, her reputation, everything she had worked for, could be destroyed in this moment. But all she could think about was the man in the chair. The silent, slumping man who was paying the price for Carol's arrogance. "Where did you even get a degree?" Carol pressed on, piling on the insults, enjoying her power. "Was it from some online course? Did you print it yourself?" Each question was a calculated jab, designed to demean and discredit her, to make her small. And it was working. The other passengers murmured amongst themselves. The doubt Carol had planted was taking root. Maybe she wasn't a doctor. Maybe she was just some crazy woman. Lena felt a tremor in her hands. It was the crushing weight of powerlessness. She, who could hold a human heart in her hands and mend it, was being stopped by an ignorant flight attendant. The injustice of it was a bitter pill. She opened her mouth to say something, anything. But what could she say that would break through this wall of bigotry? Just as the last spark of hope began to flicker out, a new voice cut through the tension. It was calm, authoritative, and cold as ice. "What is going on here?" The cockpit door had opened. The pilot, a man with silver hair and captain's bars gleaming on his shoulders, stood there, his face a thundercloud. He took in the scene in an instant. The blue-faced passenger, the panicked crew, and Carol standing nose to nose with Lena. Before Carol could spin her version of the story, another man stood up from his seat in 2A. He was a quiet, unassuming man in a simple gray suit, who had been watching the entire exchange with a look of growing horror. "Captain," the man said, his voice carrying an effortless authority that silenced the cabin. "That flight attendant is preventing a doctor from saving that man's life." Carol whirled around, her face contorted with fury. "Sir, this woman has provided no credentials. She is a liability." The man in the suit simply ignored her. He looked directly at the pilot, then gestured toward Lena. "Captain, allow me to introduce you to Dr. Lena Washington. She is not just a doctor. She is one of the world's foremost cardiothoracic surgeons. She is also the keynote speaker for the National Cardiology Symposium in Chicago, which is where many of us in first class are headed." A collective gasp went through the cabin. The businessman in 24A, who had been smirking just moments before, looked as if he had been slapped. The man in the suit continued, his voice dropping to a dangerously low level as he turned his gaze on Carol. "And the man you are letting die," he said, pointing to the slumped passenger, "is Mr. Charles Harrison, the billionaire philanthropist, the primary benefactor and founder of the entire symposium. You are preventing the guest of honor from saving the host's life." The reveal landed like a bomb. The name Charles Harrison was instantly recognizable. His face was on the cover of magazines, his foundation's name on hospitals and universities across the country. As if on cue, the co-pilot emerged from the cockpit, a passenger manifest in his hand. He had heard Lena's name and had done a quick check. "Captain, he's right," the co-pilot confirmed, his eyes wide. "Her profession is listed. Dr. Lena Washington, MD, PhD. He looked at Lena with newfound reverence. Then he leaned toward the pilot's intercom, his voice booming through the aircraft with sudden urgency. "This is the flight deck. We have a code blue in the first-class cabin. Dr. Lena Washington, your assistance is required immediately. All crew, facilitate Dr. Washington." The official call, the emergency code, was the final, devastating blow to Carol's authority. It was a complete and total override. The power dynamic in the narrow aisle didn't just shift, it shattered and reformed in an instant. Carol's face went from smugly flushed to a ghastly, waxy white. The color drained away as if a plug had been pulled. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The carefully constructed mask of professional superiority crumbled, revealing the panicked, ignorant woman beneath. Her eyes darted from the pilot's stony face to the quiet fury in the eyes of the man from 2A, who she now realized must be someone incredibly important. He was Dr. Evans, the chairman of the symposium committee. I was just," she stammered, her voice a pathetic whisper. "Protocol. I was following protocol." But the excuse was hollow, and everyone knew it. It wasn't protocol. It was prejudice. Her hands began to tremble, and she took an involuntary step back, shrinking away from Lena. The woman she had just publicly humiliated, had called a liar and a hysteric, was now the only person on the plane who mattered. Lena didn't waste a single second on the collapsing flight attendant. Her focus was absolute. She pushed past the now frozen Carol and dropped to her knees beside Charles Harrison's seat. The time for talk was over. The time for action was perilously short. "Get me the aircraft's medical kit, now!" she commanded, her voice ringing with the authority that had been denied to her moments before. Another flight attendant, a young man with a pale, frightened face, scrambled to obey. Lena tilted Mr. Harrison's head back, checking his airway. It was completely blocked. His pulse was thready, his breathing non-existent. She hooked her arms around his torso from behind, lacing her hands together just above his navel. She gave a series of powerful upward thrusts. 1, 2, 3, nothing. The obstruction wasn't moving. "He's not responding," she yelled. "The blockage is too deep. I need to open his airway." The young flight attendant returned with the red medical kit, fumbling with the latches. Lena ripped it open, her hands flying through the contents. Gauze, bandages, aspirin. Useless. She needed a scalpel, a trocar, something sharp and hollow. "Is there a large-gauge IV catheter in here? Or a sturdy pen? A metal straw?" she asked, her mind racing, adapting. The co-pilot, who had been hovering nearby, immediately understood. "Dr. Evans, your pen," he said, pointing to the expensive-looking fountain pen in the chairman's pocket. Dr. Evans handed it over without a word. Lena took it, quickly disassembling it, keeping the hard, hollow barrel. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. She also grabbed a small, sharp box cutter from the kit's utility section. "I need you to hold his head steady," she instructed the co-pilot. "And you," she said to the young flight attendant, "get ready with that oxygen mask." The first-class cabin had become an operating theater. The passengers watched in stunned, breathless silence. The phones were still out, but the nature of the recording had changed. This was no longer a spectacle of social drama. It was a desperate fight for life. With practiced precision, Lena located the cricothyroid membrane in Mr. Harrison's neck. It was a procedure she had performed dozens of times in sterile, well-lit emergency rooms, not in the cramped aisle of a turbulent airplane. But the principles were the same. "This is going to be messy," she warned, more to herself than anyone else. She made a swift, decisive incision with the box cutter. A small welling of blood appeared. Then, with firm pressure, she inserted the hollow barrel of the pen into the opening. There was a faint, whistling gurgle. It was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. It was the sound of air, of life. "Oxygen!" she commanded. The flight attendant pressed the mask over the end of the pen barrel. Lena watched Mr. Harrison's chest. It rose, faintly at first, then more strongly. A flicker of color, a pale pink, began to creep back into his gray lips. His eyelids fluttered. A wave of collective relief washed through the cabin. Someone let out a sob. Lena sat back on her heels, the pen barrel still held firmly in place, her hand covered in blood. She was breathing almost as hard as her patient. She had done it. She had pulled him back from the brink. Only then did she look up. The pilot was staring at her, his face a mixture of awe and profound gratitude. Dr. Evans was nodding slowly, a look of deep respect in his eyes. And Carol was huddled near the galley, her face buried in her hands, her body shaking with silent, racking sobs. Her public reckoning had begun. The pilot let the scene settle for a moment, letting the magnitude of what had just happened sink in. He let everyone see the hero, and he let everyone see the fool. Then he straightened up, his captain's authority returning like a physical force. He turned his gaze, cold as a winter sky, onto the crumpled form of the lead flight attendant. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice was quiet, controlled, and carried the weight of absolute finality. It cut through the hushed cabin, each word a hammer blow. "Carol," he said, and her name hung in the air like a conviction. "You are relieved of your duties, effective immediately." Carol looked up, her face streaked with tears and makeup. "Captain, please, I made a mistake." "A mistake?" the pilot repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "A mistake is spilling coffee on a passenger. What you did was place your own prejudice above a man's life. You actively obstructed a medical professional during a code blue emergency. You humiliated a passenger who was trying to help. You disgraced your uniform, this airline, and yourself." He paused, letting the indictment hang in the air. "You will go to the rear of the aircraft, and you will stay there until we land. You will not speak to any crew or passengers. Upon landing, you will be escorted off this plane by airline executives and federal air marshals. You are finished. Pack your things." The sentence was delivered. The public humiliation that Carol had tried to inflict upon Lena was now returned to her, tenfold. The same phones that had recorded Lena's degradation were now capturing Carol's utter ruin. The smirks and whispers were now directed at her. She stumbled to her feet, her face a mask of shame, and made the long walk of disgrace down the aisle to the back of the plane, every eye following her. With the immediate crisis over and the antagonist removed, a sense of calm began to return. Lena remained with Mr. Harrison, monitoring his breathing, holding the makeshift airway in place. She spoke in low, reassuring tones to the flight crew, directing them with an easy competence that left no room for doubt. As the plane began its final descent into Chicago, Lena finally allowed herself a moment. She looked down at her hands, stained with a stranger's blood. She thought of her mother, of her quiet strength and unwavering belief in doing the right thing, no matter the cost. A tear, hot and heavy, escaped her eye and traced a clean path through the grime and exhaustion on her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of release. When the plane was on the ground and the paramedics had taken over, carefully transferring Mr. Harrison to a stretcher, Lena finally stood up, her legs stiff and sore. The entire cabin was still watching her. The silence was thick with unspoken apologies and awe. She turned, not to leave, but to face them. She looked at the faces in the crowd, the ashamed businessmen, the wide-eyed students, the grateful family. She didn't look angry. She just looked tired and strong. "Today," she began, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the aircraft, "we almost watched a man die." She let that sink in. Not because of a lack of medical knowledge or a lack of equipment, but because of a judgment made in an instant, based on nothing more than the clothes I was wearing and the color of my skin. She met the eyes of the businessman from her row. He flinched and looked away. "A person's worth," she continued, her voice gaining strength, "is not determined by their seat number on an airplane. It's not in their bank account or on their name tag. It's in here." She placed a hand over her heart. "It's in their actions. It's in their compassion. It's in their willingness to help another human being. Never forget what you saw today. Never let your assumptions be the reason help doesn't arrive. Never be the person who stands in the way." She finished speaking, the silence held for a beat, a moment of profound, shared reflection. Then, a single person in the back began to clap. A slow, rhythmic applause. Another joined in, then another. Within seconds, the entire plane, from the front of first class to the last row of coach, erupted in a wave of thunderous applause. It was a standing ovation, a roar of gratitude and respect that washed over her, cleansing the stain of the earlier humiliation. It was the sound of vindication. The moment the jet bridge connected to the aircraft, the scene transformed. The door opened not just to paramedics, but to a phalanx of airline executives in dark suits, their faces grim. They were followed by a young man whose expensive suit and anxious energy marked him as someone of immense importance. He was William Harrison, Charles Harrison's son, and the CEO of his father's multi-billion-dollar corporate empire. William Harrison bypassed the airline officials completely, his eyes scanning the cabin until they landed on Lena. He strode directly to her, his expression a mixture of terror and profound gratitude. "Dr. Washington?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "They told me what you did. You saved my father's life." "I did what any doctor would have done," Lena said simply, finally feeling the full weight of the day settle upon her. "No," William said, shaking his head fiercely. "You did what others were prevented from doing. You did what you had to do in the face of unbelievable ignorance. The crew told me everything." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a checkbook. He quickly scribbled on it, his movements sharp and decisive. He tore it out and handed it to Lena. "This is for your trouble, for the humiliation you endured. It's not nearly enough, but it's a start." Lena glanced down. The check was made out to her for $50,000. She stared at it, speechless. It was more money than she had seen in her personal account in years. It was enough to erase the last of her mother's medical debts, to fix her car, to breathe. But William Harrison was just getting started. "My family's foundation, the Harrison Foundation, is eternally in your debt. I understand you volunteer at a community clinic?" Lena nodded, still stunned. "The Northside Community Clinic. Yes." "Consider it funded," William said. "Tomorrow morning, my foundation will be making a $10 million donation to the clinic, in your name. We're going to build a new wing, a state-of-the-art surgical center. We'll call it the Dr. Lena Washington Wing." Tears welled in Lena's eyes, blurring the numbers on the check. $10 million. For her clinic. For the people who had nowhere else to go. It was a miracle born from a nightmare. "And," William continued, his voice softening, "we would be honored if you would accept a position on the Foundation's board of directors. We are establishing a new $50 million fund for medical research and innovation. We want you to run it. You would have the power to fund the research you believe in, to help doctors and scientists who are changing the world. You can name your salary." It was too much to process. A job, a position of immense power and influence, a chance to enact real, systemic change on a global scale. In the span of a 10-minute conversation on a jet bridge, her entire life had been irrevocably transformed from one of struggle and grief to one of unimaginable opportunity and security. While Lena was absorbing this life-altering news, the lead airline executive, a senior vice president named Mr. Jennings, approached her, his face a portrait of deep apology. "Dr. Washington, on behalf of this airline, I offer our most sincere and humble apologies. What happened on this flight is inexcusable and represents a catastrophic failure of our standards." He explained that Carol had been fired before the plane even landed. Her flight credentials were being permanently revoked, and the airline was pursuing legal action against her for endangering a passenger. Furthermore, the story, captured on dozens of phones, had already begun to leak online. The airline, in an act of damage control and genuine remorse, was getting ahead of it. We are immediately implementing a new, mandatory, company-wide anti-bias and de-escalation training program, Mr. Jennings said, and we would be honored if we could call it the Washington Protocol, to serve as a permanent reminder of your grace under pressure and the lesson that must be learned from this. A symbolic reward. Her name would become part of the airline's policy, a legacy of change. He then handed her a sleek black card. This is for you. Lifetime first-class global travel on any of our flights. It is the very least we can do. Lena looked from the check in her hand to the black card, to the earnest faces of William Harrison and the airline executive. The world had tilted on its axis. The humiliation, the anger, the helplessness. It was all being washed away by a tidal wave of vindication and reward. The prejudice that had tried to silence her had instead given her the biggest platform of her life. 6 months later, the sun streamed through the large glass windows of a brand new building. The smell of fresh paint and new beginnings hung in the air. A large banner was strung across the entrance. Grand opening of the Dr. Lena Washington Wing, Northside Community Clinic. Lena stood at a podium, not in the simple, tired clothes she had worn on the plane, but in a sharply tailored suit that radiated confidence. The exhaustion was gone from her eyes, replaced by a vibrant, determined light. She looked out at the crowd, community members, city officials, news reporters, and in the front row, a smiling Charles Harrison, fully recovered, sitting next to his son, William. 6 months ago, Lena said into the microphone, her voice clear and strong, I was reminded that a single moment can change a life. But what I've learned since then is that what you do with that moment is what defines you. She was no longer just a doctor. She was a leader. As head of the Harrison Foundation's Medical Research Fund, she had already approved grants for 3 groundbreaking projects led by women of color. As a board member, she had helped reshape the foundation's entire outreach strategy to better serve marginalized communities. The Washington Protocol was now a standard training module in the aviation industry, and she had been asked to consult with other corporations on its implementation. Her suffering had been forged into a tool for change. Her pain had been given a purpose. This wing, she continued, gesturing to the gleaming building behind her, is not just a building. It is a promise. It is a promise that quality health care will be available to everyone, regardless of their income, their background, or the color of their skin. It is a promise that a person's worth will be judged by the content of their character, not the contents of their wallet. The crowd applauded warmly. Lena smiled, a genuine, joyful smile that reached her eyes. She then held up a hand. And today, I want to make another promise. The promise of opportunity. She announced the creation of the Washington Protocol Scholarship, a full-ride medical school scholarship for a promising student from an underprivileged background. The first recipient of this scholarship, Lena announced, her voice swelling with pride, is a young woman who has volunteered here at this clinic since she was 16. A young woman who embodies the spirit of service and compassion. Please join me in congratulating Miss Imani Adebayo. A young black woman in the crowd gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Tears streamed down her face as Lena beckoned her to the stage. Lena hugged her tightly and handed her an oversized ceremonial check, a perfect echo of the one that had changed her own life. In that moment, she wasn't just giving away money. She was passing a torch. She was using the power she had been given to lift someone else up, to ensure the cycle of kindness and opportunity continued long after she was gone. She looked out at the sea of faces, at the new building bearing her name, at the crying, grateful young woman beside her. Her mother's voice echoed in her heart, clearer than ever. You don't hide your light, Lena girl. You shine it for everyone who can't. And in the bright, hopeful light of that new day, Lena Washington shone. She had become someone's hero, a beacon showing others the way forward.